And this is the story of, I've forgotten his name for a second. This is the story of Tam O'Shanter, who lived in Ayr on the west coast of Scotland and loved nothing more than spending the nights at one of the drinking houses, the local drinking houses, whiling away the hours with his good friends, the cobbler or the smithy, and coming home roaring drunk in the middle of the night, much to the displeasure of his wife, Kate, who had told him on many occasions that if he didn't change his ways, he was going to wake up dead one day in the River Doon, having fallen from his horse in his drunken state. But if you think that that had any effect on the way that Tam lived his life, then you'd be sadly mistaken. And on the night that this story takes place, Tam was sat at his favourite inn, and his friends were at his side, and the fire was roaring. And while the whiskey was pouring down, and the ale was pouring down, and the stories were pouring out, oh, and they were having such a wonderful time. And as the night rolled on, while Tam found himself sidling up to the landlord's wife, and the two of them whispering away little secrets to each other, and getting all cozy like and everything, but outside, a storm was brewing. But minutes rolled into hours, and the hours rolled by like minutes. And before anybody knew it, it was time for Tam to say farewell to his friends and take his leave. So he put on his coat and he went out into the night. Oh, it was dreich. The rain was pouring. So he pulled his collar up against the rain, and he climbed onto the back of his faithful mare, Meg, and set off along the track, back to his cottage and back to his wife, Kate, who was sat at home quietly brewing her wrath, waiting for him to come home. And as he rode along the track out of town, while the wind began to howl, and he rode along the road, and the rain was pouring, and the lightning was flashing and lighting up the sky, and the thunder was whipping through the air, and it was terrible. He rode into the woods, and as he rode through the woods, the lightning flashed. There were all kinds of shadows there in the trees, and he knew that these parts were haunted, so he went over a sonnet in his head just to keep his mind off of the terrible things that might lie out there. But at the same time, he kept a wary eye out in case any of the ghosts should take him by surprise. And on through the woods he rode, and as he came out through the woods on the other side, there was the Alloway church, the old kirk, the haunted church, derelict, and there was light coming from the windows, and there was music coming on the back of the wind, and he could hear the sound of cackling and screaming, but his heart was filled with fear, but his head was filled with curiosity. And so he rode towards the old kirk, and when he got there, he climbed down off of Meg's back and tied her to a post, and then he made his way through the gate and through the churchyard, through past the gravestones, and up to where there was a buttress at the bottom of the just by the wall, and he climbed up onto that buttress and grabbed a hold of a ledge, and he pulled himself along until he came to a window, and he pulled himself up, and he looked in through the window. What a sight befell his eyes! And the place was lit up from, well, what was it lit up from? There was a dozen or so coffins spread all around, and the lids were open, and inside each coffin lay a corpse in the clothes in which it had been buried. And each corpse held out a hand, and in that hand was a candle. And the candle lit up the whole room, and all around were laid all manner of murderous weapons, and such awful sights that I couldn't tell you. Too much for a night like this. But there in the window opposite, in the arch of that window, sat none other than Old Nick, the devil himself. And he had a set of pipes under his arm, and he was blowing away on those pipes and playing on the chanter, and out of the chanter came jigs and reels and strathspeys. There, in the light of those candles, as Tam watched on, the ugliest old hags he had seen in his life were dancing around the hall in their underwear, witches of every one of them, dancing to the jigs and the reels. And there amongst them was one who was younger, more sprightly, more attractive maybe than all of the others. And that was Maggie. And she was wearing her cutty sark, which, for those of you that don't know, is what they called a very short skirt in those parts, in those days. And she was dancing and screaming and cackling with all the other witches. And Tam watched, transfixed, as she danced around the church. And, well, he was full of whiskey and he was full of ale. And, well, his caution had blown to the wind. And as Maggie danced by, he called out, "Oh, well done, Maggie, show us your cutty sark." And in that moment, silence fell upon that church. And in the very next moment, the witches poured out through the windows, and they poured out through the roof and through the doors, and they came like screaming like banshees, like an angry swarm of wasps whose nest has been kicked by a bear. And when Tam saw them coming, he leapt down from that church wall and he ran for all his might. He ran for his life through the churchyard, past the church stones, down to the gate where very anxious Meg was waiting. He untied her and leapt upon her back and dug his heels in. But Meg needed no encouragement. As soon as Tam was on her back, she was off down that long, dark track, bounding and galloping, and with every stride getting closer to home, with every stride and every bound getting closer to safety. But the witches were hot on their tail, and Maggie reached out for Meg's tail and was going to grab a hold of it and pull both horse and rider down to the ground and the pits of hell, no doubt. But just as she was about to put her hands upon that horse's tail, an older witch still flew in from above, grabbed hold of the tail with an iron-like grip, and was just about to pull them down when horse and rider came to a bridge across the river. And we all know witches cannot cross running water. And in that moment, they came to a standstill, and horse and rider rode on. And in that moment, horse and tail were separated. And Tam and Meg had reached safety, and the witches, full of anger, full of fury, could do nothing more than stand at the threshold of that bridge, and Nanny holding up the bloody stump of Meg's tail. But Meg and Tam had made it to safety, and now the only danger that lay ahead was facing Kate when he got home. This brings us to the end of the story, but my friends, let it be a warning to those of us that would spend the nights drinking whiskey and drinking ale with our friends at the local inn and paying no attention to the words of our loved ones. Just remember what befell Tam and Meg on their way home that dark, wet, and windy night.